Good evening, everyone. Pursuant to Section 54956 of the California Government Code, a special joint meeting for a workshop of the City Council and the Planning Commission is hereby called for at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, June 10th, 2021. So at this time, Margaret, if we could get a roll call for the City Council, please.
Councilmember Mendoza. Councilmember Mendoza.
Here. Sorry, my phone.
Councilmember Meyer.
Here.
Councilmember Rary.
Here.
Mayor Bryant.
Here.
And let the record reflect that Vice Mayor Rodriguez is absent.
Okay, at this time, could I get a roll call for the Planning Commission, please?
Vice Chair Cross.
Present.
Commissioner Dolter.
Present.
Commissioner Roberts. Commissioner Sparling.
Present.
Chair Ziegler. The Planning Commission is present with the exception of Commissioner Roberts.
Okay, so it does look like that we have a quorum. Before we move further, I have a transplant meeting that I have to leave this meeting for at 6:25. And if we could, the procedures are that if the mayor is unavailable to chair a meeting, the vice mayor is unavailable, then it goes to the city manager. But if council would prefer, if I could get a motion, if one of the council members would like to chair the meeting at 6:25.
I make a motion that Karen Rary chair the meeting at 6:25.
We have a first.
Second.
And a second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Mendoza.
Yes.
Councilmember Meyer.
Yes.
Councilmember Rary.
Do I abstain?
No, please.
Aye.
Mayor Bryant.
Aye.
Motion
Thank you,
carries with Vice Mayor Rodriguez absent.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Rary. And at this time, then, I will turn the meeting over to Alexis Morris, who will provide a staff report. Alexis.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Thank you for your time tonight for this joint session of City Council and Planning Commission. I know everyone's time is very valuable, and we are probably still a little hungover from Tuesday night's council meeting timeline. So I really do appreciate it. I'm going to share my PowerPoint right now. If you want to give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that okay. So I can't see my notes, but bear with me if I look down at my paper every now and then. So this joint meeting tonight is special. It's the first in what is envisioned as a series of workshops related to land use laws and regulations that impact the city and the community development department specifically. Tonight's meeting will focus on the general plan, as it says here, and the housing element, which is a chapter or element of the general plan. Staff did provide a detailed memo to the Planning Commission and Council on Monday. So tonight we'll just be highlighting the main topics from that memo. The memo also provided links to additional resources, so you can take a deeper dive into any one of the topics we're going to touch on tonight, if you wish. We have representatives from the planning staff here tonight, the city attorney's office, and we're very lucky to have Barbara Kautz with us from Goldfarb and Littman. She contributed some of the content for some of the slides, and she is, I think it's fair to say, a preeminent expert in the state of California on housing element laws. So we're very I'm happy to have her here, and she's available to answer questions after the presentation. Sorry. So the agenda for tonight, as I said, is to discuss general plans, how they work, also discuss the housing element of the general plan, to take a closer look at that, because the council meeting before last, there were a lot of questions and interest in what the housing element is, so we thought we would use tonight as an opportunity to take a deeper dive into that aspect of general plans. We'll take public comments, and then we'd also like to discuss future workshop ideas and formats, because as we said, your time is valuable, and we want to make sure we have some feedback on how this does or doesn't work, since it's our first attempt to do this. So what is a general plan? We'll just dive right in. California state law requires each city and county to adopt a general plan. The general plan is the guiding document for a city. It's the most important land use and policy document that a city has. The general plan expresses the community's development goals and guides the public policy relative to the distribution of land uses, both public and private. A thorough, up-to-date general plan benefits communities by communicating the community's vision, promoting better projects, streamlining processes, and integrating quality planning, and improving access and use of available resources. These are I won't read them all, but these are the guiding principles that were used during Brentwood's most recent general plan update process. And as you can see, these principles really focus on the quality of life and economic development. And these are what really informed and developed the many policies that exist in general plans, in City of Brentwood's general plan, sorry. Our general plan was adopted in 2014, so it's a relatively new general plan, about 7 years old. The state requires 7 mandatory elements for general plans. Our general plan includes 11, including the housing element, which we'll talk about in a little more. You'll see with the asterisk, those indicate which are mandatory. And then we've added additional elements such as community services and facilities, economic development, which we have the right to do. We have to have a minimum of 7, and then whatever elements the community wants or feels are essential to its planning. This general plan contains broad goals supported by more specific policies and actions in each one of these elements. It's these policies that staff analyzes when trying to make a determination whether a project or an action is consistent with the general plan. So this is an example of what those goals, policies, and actions look like. This is from the circulation element. So just one example. So these are the types of goals and policies that staff is using and decision makers are using when we say, is a project or isn't it consistent with the general plan? And these action items show how these may or may not be implemented by either the city, developers, property owners, depending on the issue. State law requires that many actions be consistent with the general plan. This includes land use decisions and public projects like the capital improvement program. Any given project doesn't need to be consistent with each and every policy in the general plan if those policies are not relevant or leave room for interpretation or very, very broadly written. General plans are by nature, very long-range planning documents. A typical, what we call horizon for a general plan is 20 years. Some cities do 15, some do 30. Our particular general plan doesn't specify, but a planning horizon of 20 to 30 years was used when developing the policies in our general plan. Because of the long time frame, the general plan may need to be updated occasionally to keep up with changes in the community, the economy, or state law. Regular updates, say 5 to 10 years, depending on a city's policy or practices, can keep a general plan relevant to the community needs and more useful for economic development purposes. An example of the type of regular updates that may be needed for a general plan are the housing element, which is updated every 5 to 8 years, depending on the jurisdiction. The safety element needs updating currently based on a number of new state laws. And another example is on Tuesday, the council just approved an amendment to the land use element for the fire station. The housing element is one of the 7 mandatory elements of the general plan, as I said. It must be updated on a state-mandated schedule, independent of any other general plan updates. The city of Brentwood is currently on an 8-year schedule, which is a good thing. If we were on a 5-year schedule, that usually means there's some concern on the part of the State Housing and Community Development, or HCD, about our implementation of our general plan. So it's best to be on an 8-year cycle, as it's called. The state also mandates the content of the housing element, whereas the city has much more freedom, as I said earlier, in discretion over the content of the other elements. The housing element is one where we have very little freedom or discretion about the minimum requirements that need to be contained. The housing element's main purpose is to plan for housing at all income levels in our city. The state and the Association of Bay Area Governments, also called ABAG, determine how many housing units the city must provide at each income level, and this is called our Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or we'll call it RHNA for short. As I said, the element must be updated every 8 years in Brentwood. The deadline for this cycle to be completed this time is by January 2023, and we'll refer to this as the 6th cycle. So 18 months from now, our general plan needs to be certified by HCD. State law is very specific as to what information must be included in each housing element. The housing element covers a vast range of housing-related considerations and objectives beyond just the RHNA obligation. The primary components of the housing element are the assessment of housing needs, creating goals and policies related to housing, and creating a plan with a schedule to implement the housing element. And each one of these components has subcomponents and sub-areas of detail that need to be included. It can get quite detailed and complex. So the RHNA is Brentwood's obligation for the next housing element cycle. The allocation for Brentwood is 1,522 units, as you see on this chart, overall. This is a 50% increase over the last housing element. It is actually consistent with the number that was in the previous 3rd cycle housing element. It was very similar. So you'll see from this chart the number of units that we must account for or plan for in each income level. Extremely to very low income is 402 units. Low income is 232 units. Moderate income is 247 units. And above moderate is 641 units. Many other jurisdictions in the Bay Area have their RHNA obligation increase significantly over this last housing element cycle. It's not just the city of Brentwood. This is the trend for the entire Bay Area, almost the entire Bay Area. So if anyone is familiar with our current 5th cycle housing element, there are major changes required by the state for the upcoming 6th cycle housing element. There are significant new changes. So we'll just summarize some of them here. As I mentioned, the RHNA is significantly higher for many jurisdictions. Ours is 50% higher. The state has imposed new fair housing requirements, which will likely result in requirement that sites go in less, quote unquote, segregated areas, in areas with better schools and access to jobs. They're also called higher resource areas. There are new, what are called no net loss provisions that have been put on us by the state, which will effectively require the city to identify a surplus of sites. Should residential densities or units in the city be reduced on any particular site, we might have to accommodate that elsewhere in the city to keep compliance with our housing element. Because of these new requirements, the up-and-coming housing element will be more a complex process than a mere update of our unit count or our required units. It actually may be more accurate to think of this next housing element as a new housing element rather than an update, because there are so many new requirements put on us by the state. So more major changes to discuss. This is particularly about the analysis of site inventory. So the good news is that the city's current housing element shows that there may be more than enough sites to accommodate our new RHNA number going forward. So that's the good news. We have a significant number of sites and more than enough sites that could accommodate a 30 unit per acre density, which is what is required to be considered eligible for lower income housing. However, the city would need to remove more sites that have been developed since the last housing element, and the changes in state law have made it much stricter, have created much stricter standards for which sites can be considered eligible for housing going forward. For the housing element to conform with state law, we'll need to show that it conforms to these new standards. So we may be able to reuse sites that we had in our previous housing element, or we may not, depending on some of the new criteria that's been put on us by the state. So I briefly mentioned we have to provide an analysis for fair housing. It's called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. This is a significant new requirement in the city's housing element that's never been placed on any housing element in the state before. This will require a type of analysis of available sites that the city has never done before. So we won't be able to rely on our past housing element to provide this information to us. This is a whole new sector of analysis required by the state. It will also require extensive public outreach that we would likely do anyway as a part of our housing element update, but now we are required to document it and verify that we have done it in a way that affirmatively furthers fair housing. So I think I mentioned there's a lot of new requirements by the state, so here are even more that I won't be able to dive into too deeply during this presentation. But this is just an example of just how many new areas of information and requirements the state has put on us. Updating data on housing needs. We now have to accommodate affordable ADUs, accessory dwelling units, in our housing element, not just accessory dwelling units, but affordable. We have to provide an electronic sites inventory, and it goes on and on. In addition to all the new requirements that the state has put on us, the state is also increasing scrutiny around implementation of housing elements across the state. This scrutiny is coming both from HCD and the Attorney General's office. HCD has created and staffed a new enforcement unit, and the Attorney General has already been sending notices of violation to jurisdictions and have even filed suits against some jurisdictions for issues related to their housing element implementation. If a city does not have a compliant housing element, the city may face significant fines, or the court may actually limit the city's local land use decision-making authority until the city brings its housing element into compliance. A city could also lose the right to deny certain types of projects if they have a non-compliant housing element. So not only are housing elements becoming much more complex than they've ever been, the stakes are also higher than they've ever been. So that is admittedly a brief summary of the memo that was provided and all the changes to housing element law. This is a complex subject, and we could talk about it for hours or days, as I've had many classes on it, but that's just a highlight of some of the things we're facing in our upcoming housing element. The next steps is staff will be seeking authorization from the council on June 22nd to set aside funds for the housing element update process. Once funds were set aside by council, staff will release an RFP and begin the consultant selection process. Council will be involved in this consultant selection. Once a consultant is selected, the budget and scope of work will be finalized with council input, and then the analysis and public engagement will begin. And again, we have until January 2023 to finish this process. So that concludes the general plan and the housing element presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. Again, we have representatives here from the Planning Department, the City Attorney's Office, Barbara Couts from Goldfarb and Lippman, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you have any questions of staff, clarifying questions at this point in time, if you could use the raise your hand on the Zoom call, and I'll call you in the room.
Can you see my hand, Mayor? I'm not sure. You're on mute.
Councilmember Mendoza.
Okay, thank you. Alexis, thank you so much for the presentation. I do have a couple of questions. I think you said affordable housing. They were saying that we needed maximum of 30 units per acre. Is that what you have in there?
Yes, so the eligible site criteria for a very low affordable housing is a 30-unit density per acre, minimum.
Okay. I'm just comparing that to the new zoning code update that was presented to us, and that's up to 50. So once we get to that zoning update, let's talk about why if the maximum that we need is 30, why would the new zoning code update, which all of these things tie together, right? Like zoning code, housing element, general plan. So that's going to be questions that I have when the zoning code update. If the criteria here is 30, why would we put 50 in our general plan? The other thing is, I know I would, I don't know if anyone else on Planning Commission or Council would like to be kept abreast of the lawsuits that are happening, the rationale for the lawsuit, whether it be the AG or the HCD, and what were the consequences of the lawsuit, just so that we know what decisions we're making could drive a lawsuit or not drive a lawsuit. Because, we're all passionate about land use in Brentwood, but I also want to stay within legally what we should be doing. So knowing what triggers a lawsuit from those two entities would be great. And then the other thing, you said on June 22nd, you're coming to council with a request for funds, which I totally understand. And I know we had questions last time. This time, will there be a detailed scope of work that is that money will be used for?
I can attach our draft RFP to that report. So the RFP is a little broader, I would say, than a scope of work, because the scope of work would include all the tasks and subtasks that a consultant might include in their proposal. But we can certainly draft a RFP, attach a draft RFP, to the staff report. That'll be the architecture of the scope of work, if that makes sense.
The reason I asked that is because I was actually researching what other cities have paid for their housing element update, their CEQA, their safety update, and their general plan. The maximum I saw was $122,000. So that's why I know the last time the ask was $700, so I would like to get it as close. I don't want to over budget if we don't have to on this one. So that's the reason I asked for that. And on the chart, table 2 in the agenda packet, current RENA numbers and new 6th cycle numbers, is there any way we can get that with an added row as a 5th cycle, like what did we actually complete in the 5th cycle per bucket? Yeah, that would be great. And I think that's all I have right now.
I can even look that up right now during discussion if you'd like me to pull that up.
You can email it. It's okay. It's no big deal. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Chair Ziegler. Chair Ziegler, you're muted. We can't hear you, but I can read your lips. Is there something that we can do on our end, Margaret?
It appears that he's unmuted. He may need to change his audio input.
Try that.
Loud and clear.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay. What I was saying is I think there's some people that are watching and that the public's watching this. Just for clarification, when you talk about the RENA numbers, where Brentwood is, where we are at the 5th level, when you go to the 6th level. A couple things that I'm just curious next time or at some point in time, kind of know where Brentwood is at this point in time in comparison to those numbers. But I also want to make it clear, to my understanding, is those numbers are set forth, but it's not that we have to go and build those. It's a matter of we have to have the land set aside to be able to fall into those categories. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Is that
Yes, thank
correct?
you for that clarification. Yes, the city does not build or produce housing as a rule. So the goal of the general plan policy is to set aside and zone and remove obstacles for providing that number of units of housing, but we do not actually have the responsibility of producing it ourselves.
Okay, I just want to make sure people understand that just because those numbers are there doesn't mean we have to go out there and build those things. So, and then just to clarify, you had one of the statements you had made about you said we can reuse sites, or there's the ability to reuse sites. When you say that, is that meaning like we redesignate something may have been under one, low income, and we can redesignate that to a different level based on RENA? Or just I want to get a clarification on when you said reuse a site.
And so if we've identified a site in the current housing element or the last two elements as eligible for housing and it's still undeveloped or hasn't been developed, we can carry that forward into the new housing element if we meet certain criteria for doing that. And Barbara may be able to expand on that slightly. But in order to carry it forward from a past housing element, we can do that, but the state puts certain requirements on us for those reuse sites. I don't know, Barbara, if you want to explain that in a couple of sentences. Oh, you're on mute.
Just like everybody else. If you want to reuse a site that's listed in your current housing element, if it's a non-vacant site, if it's listed in your current element, or if it's a vacant site and was listed in the last two housing elements, you can, quote, reuse them, but they have to be zoned for what's called by right zoning. And that means that if a developer proposes a project, basically a rental housing project that doesn't require a subdivision and has at least 20% lower income housing, then they're exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, and the only approval the city can require is design review. So it basically, if you want to reuse a site that falls into one of the categories, it basically tries to streamline the process for a rental project that has 20% affordable housing.
All right. Thank you. That's all the questions I have at this time.
Member Rary?
So on a follow-up on that question, are you saying that, let's say it was a site is designated for medium housing and we pull it up from the last one and include it in this one because the state's that it's still vacant, that they get a fast pass on it?
Sorry, I forgot one critical thing. It's only if you designate the site for lower income housing. So if you continue to designate the site for medium income housing, then then the by right provisions don't apply. But if you want to designate one of the medium income sites and it's zoned appropriately and you want to use it for lower income housing, then the by right would apply.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are these, as we know, there's no real low-income housing anymore, unless even apartments. I mean, when studios are going for $1,800, $2,200 a month, even here in Brentwood, I mean that's not low income. So, how are these going to be deed restricted areas then?
Well, you have to designate. I'm sounding frustrated because I think the law is frustrating. You have to, you must designate sites that are, quote, suitable for lower income housing. So as Alexis said, those have to be zoned at least, they have to allow it at least 20 units an acre. But there really is not enough money in the state to, lower income housing, as you all know, requires pretty substantial subsidies. So there's really not enough money in the state to develop all those sites that you designate as lower income housing. The state, however, Alexis referenced this under no net loss, has decided that, say, a developer comes in, provides, let's say, meets your inclusionary requirements on one of these sites, but, only has 10, maybe 20% lower income housing, then you have to show that you still have enough sites to accommodate the rest of your lower income housing need. So you kind of lose that site once you approve that project, or you only get 10 or 20% of the units when you approve that project. That's why Alexis was talking about designating more sites for lower income housing than you need. I was struck in looking at your last housing element that you have a lot of sites. So I think the city should be in pretty good shape.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And for Alexis, can you tell me if, in looking at other cities and looking at their housing element and what they're going through, they've created a designated page which actually goes through and says, this is the housing element, this is why we have to do it, here's why we have to do this, here's why we have to do that. And it was very easy to find. Nothing on you, but our website is very difficult to find things on. So if there's a way that we can highlight it and maybe get staff to, or maybe we can get somebody to redo our whole website.
Well, that's coming, actually.
It's a whole different meeting, I know.
Yes, but that is coming, actually. That is underway.
Okay.
Hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, but that is a website refresh is coming.
And other cities, I also found we're getting the local early action planning grants of $150,000 from the state. And as Councilmember Mendoza had alluded, I mean, the other cities aren't even spending that $150,000 to do not only their housing element update, but also their safety component. So did we apply for that and receive it?
We did, but it's not being applied to the housing element. It's being applied, I believe, to the zoning ordinance update. So, because it can go for a broad category of projects. So
there were several things it could go for.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's already allocated to a different project.
Great. Thank you.
And to follow up on your comment about the website, as a part of the housing element consultants' work, they would create a portal for the housing element. I'm hoping that bilingual information will be able to be put up there, so it'll be Spanish and English and everything, all the materials, and that would be a part of their scope of work to create that, maintain that, and communicate that.
A portal to another website?
No, portal, so it would be on our website, but it might have multiple pieces of information that it takes you to, but it would be on our website and easily available and hopefully on the main page. But
I just don't want somebody to click to ours, find, oh, now I got to click somewhere else, because, people only usually click twice and then they give up.
Yeah, and that would be the goal, is it's seamless, that it's the city's website and it brings you to a lot of information about the process. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Commissioner Sparkman.
Thank you. So regarding apartments and affordable housing, the way that I'm reading all this is that, because I think Councilmember Rary mentioned, affordable housing, I'll just say it isn't what it used to mean, right? Is the state, it sounds like the state is intending for some sort of broad-based rent control, because the market's going to drive the price of the house in reality, right? And same thing with housing as well. So how are we going to be able to comply with this when we can set aside the land, it can be built, but then 5 years from now, the rent for that place or the housing for that place has been driven up by some outside influence. Maybe everyone wants to, the Innovation Center is built, and now all of a sudden, the apartments that are close by that were going for $1,800 are now going for $3,000. How do we plan for that? Or can we plan for that?
So, yes, you can plan for it, but those types of things are policy decisions, right? And so that would be a part of the goals and programs and action items that we discussed about in the housing element. So first we would do a needs assessment and a constraints analysis, and if we think things that aren't deed restricted and are just following the market trend could become unaffordable, or we can no longer count on them as affordable units, we may need to implement policies that address that. But part of the analysis we do in the housing element at the very beginning is to see if that will be an issue. And Barbara may have some perspective on how other jurisdictions have dealt with that.
I mean, it's really a problem. Under state law, you can't impose rent control until a project's 15 years old. The goal there is, not to discourage current construction of apartments. One of our clients imposed a maximum average size on units, within their 30 unit and more zone. I think they imposed a maximum average size of 1,000 square feet, something like that, 1,000, 1,200. So that's an average size, right? So units could be bigger, units could be smaller. But, as was said, if a studio is going for $1,800 or $2,000 a month, that doesn't help very much. It basically just limits, very luxurious apartments. So I think much of the state is really struggling with this.
A follow-up question around areas of low opportunity for the affirmative future fair housing, if I wrote that down right. So Brentwood doesn't have, in my opinion, a large job center, right? It's not like San Francisco where you could say, okay, financial district versus the outer Richmond, right? So how does that get applied in the housing element? Because from my perspective, there isn't a job center in Brentwood today. Innovation Center certainly could be one, should be one when it's developed, but that's multiple years away, maybe outside the scope of the current housing or the housing element that will be done.
Well, I think one of the stories we would tell, or some of the analysis that we would do in our housing element, would be to demonstrate that, perhaps most of the city could be considered a high resource area, depending on the quality of the schools, the accessibility to transit. There may be areas that, pockets of the city that don't qualify for that, but we would, as part of our analysis, identify those areas that are resource constrained or high resource. And I think, like you said, given the nature of our suburban development pattern, we're not going to have really stark differences in particular pockets of the city, because we don't have a business center downtown, for example, that if you're too far away from that, then you don't have access to jobs. It's just more diffuse and spread out in the suburbs. Mm-hmm. And that would be a part of our argument we would make to ACD as part of our analysis.
Okay. And then last question, I think it's maybe more appropriate later, but I'm certainly going to want to learn more about ADUs. I know that's a hot topic for a lot of the public around, especially the inevitable developer or investor, I should say, not developer, investor coming in, buying a home, and then building an ADU. And I know there's limitations of what the city can do today, but how is that going to change moving forward?
Yeah, so in terms of the housing element, the ADU conversation is very focused on how we count them and whether we want to claim them as affordable or not, and then how we make that argument. But yes, if we do have a broader housing discussion, ADU and ADU law would certainly be a part of that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Meyer.
Thank you. Thanks, Alexis, for the presentation, and thank you, Barbara, for joining us. I have a few questions, too. My first one, kind of continues what Commissioner Sparling was talking about with the ADUs, but if the ADUs are potentially going to be considered affordable, but we're also looking at affordable being equitably distributed throughout town, that doesn't really compute when you're talking about how they're actually on a residential parcel. But I also wondered if we're talking about if potentially SB 9 passes and we end up with all of these lot splits, would that fit into the same, that be part of the affordable housing designation, potentially?
Yeah, I don't know if everyone is familiar with SB 9 or what it might do, but it's essentially allowing, and Barbara, please correct me if I'm wrong, but four units, main units on each lot, not counting ADUs. Am I getting that correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So
I work for the state, so yes.
Yes. I didn't want to do the math wrong. And then there's ADUs potentially for those units. So if that's passed before our housing element is the timeline of our housing element completion, we would have to deal with it. So whether an ADU or any unit counts as affordable is based on feasibility, right? And how we can document what that might rent or sell at. So again, if we want to count ADUs as affordable, there's some homework and some demonstration we have to do for the state. If we want to count those potential SB 9 created units as affordable towards our housing element allocation, then we would have to do some homework and some justification to call them that. We don't need to count them. It's a policy decision. So if we have 1,522 units and we're doing our analysis and we're not getting close to meeting our very low or low income numbers in the analysis or the allocations that the sites we're identifying, then we might need to look into ADUs in more depth, or if SB 9 passes, what those units might rent for or sell for. So it's all about justifying and being able to show to the state that these are feasibly possible for being low income units. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. Did you want to?
I was just going to add that one of the changes that the League of Cities or Cal Cities wants in the bill is to have those units being, if SB 9 passes, is to have those units count in the housing element. But my understanding is that the author or the legislature hasn't been willing to accept that amendment.
And SB 9 has already been voted on in the Senate, and it's now moving to the Assembly, so the amendments are unfortunately out the door. The next question would be Amber Lane and the Innovation Center parcel units. Would those count toward potentially, Rena? I mean,
so,
it could be timing, but.
It's timing. So how you report, Rena, is when building permits are issued. So Amber Lane has building permits issued, so it would be, and remember, we have 18 months left on the current housing element cycle to still report out on. So the next cycle is the only units that will count towards the next cycle are permits issued during that cycle, not approvals, not maps recorded, the actual construction permits issued during that cycle.
Can I, if I could make one small correction, if something that has a building permit now is not completed or is not approved for occupancy by July 1st of 2022, you can count it in the next element.
Yeah, so towards the end of the cycle, we have a 6-month period where we might be able to roll over. Amber Lane's under construction today. The Innovation Center is a longer-term project, so many of those units may count towards the next cycle by the nature of, they're not approved yet.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is, again, it's kind of speculative, and I think this is for Barbara. I see that we've got a 50% increase, and I know that cities across the state are all over the place when it comes to their increase. Are you seeing much when it comes to appeal letters? Because I'm hearing about them. There's kind of a background buzz on appeal letters, and I wanted to get your take on what you thought how that was going to go.
I think they'll almost all be denied, and that it's something of a waste of time and money to put an appeal together, and that's based on, we represented one city in the Southern California region. Four cities had appealed Santa Ana's allocation, and we represented Santa Ana. So there were 52, I think, appeals, in the Skag region, and only 2 were granted. One because there'd been an error made in the calculation of Riverside County's RHNA, but it didn't really lower it very much. And another because a city called Pico Rivera had received some report that most of the city was threatened by a dam failure. So, I mean, very, one, a clear error. Secondly, a very, very unusual circumstance. And all the rest were turned down. And there were a lot of very lengthy appeals, very, very well put together, really. But they were all denied. The basis for the appeals are very, very limited. That's really what the issue is.
I know there's been a lot of talk about the double counting and such, but it sounds like the ones that are being granted are very specifically not about that.
Yeah, the double counting, I think, more has to do with the whole number for the region, because the whole Bay Area number went up by, I think, 150%. So in that sense, Brentwood is doing better. So the whole Bay Area number went up by 150%, and that's where I've heard a lot. I think there's a group that was intending to file some litigation, or maybe it was filed in the Skag region. But I haven't heard that much about it for individual city appeals.
Okay, thank you. That takes care of everything.
Councilmember Mendoza.
I have a quick question about the affordable housing. We currently have 10% is what new developers have to allocate towards affordable housing. And this number is pretty big, 402. And I think we have about 2,000 units or so in PA1 and things like that. Could a city, and I don't know if this is legal, change our affordable housing mandate to 20% with no in lieu fees?
Yes, there are some cities that do have higher percentages. You need to demonstrate, though, that the higher percentage leaves projects financially feasible, basically. So it needs an economic feasibility study. You do not have to permit in lieu fees. For rental housing, you have to allow alternatives, but the alternatives could be off-site construction or dedication of land, something that would result in the actual construction of units. Anyway,
so we could do it with in lieu fees in Brentwood if we chose to.
Yeah,
and just have options. Okay.
Councilmember Rary.
So for affordable housing, though, or the low income and so forth, we generally, as far as I know, we have deed restricted. Is that going to be something, because I heard something about if you can demonstrate that an ADU fits there where we don't know. I mean, that person who owns that home may turn around and say, oh, yeah, it's going to be low income, kind of like over in Bridlegate where they said that they would build an ADU. But we couldn't, for their affordable housing portion, but we couldn't guarantee that those homes or those ADUs would actually be affordable homes. So what happens in that case? I mean, how do we justify calling them affordable if there's no deed restriction on them?
So the deed restriction is the most demonstrable, surefire way to say something is affordable at a certain level. When you're calculating for things that, let's say, we don't have control over, these ADUs are ministerial. There's no other approval process where we might impose requirements like we might on a bigger development. So when I say justify, you're making assumptions about rents or sale prices, and you're not counting, and you're demonstrating that that's what the market rate is, that's what the average. It's a very difficult process to go through, and then you report on that every year as those permits are issued, and then you have to update that information every year. We do annual housing reports to HCD. So it is a difficult process. It is you're hoping HCD believes you when you provide all this demonstration and this backup, but it's something you have to prove over and over again based on market conditions.
So would we need whoever has that ADU in their backyard to prove to us that they're renting it at a lower rate?
Well, that depends. What they're renting it at may be already at the moderate rate, for example. If we want to count them towards very low or low, then we may need programs and incentives and policy decisions by councils to be able to say that those become very low and low. The market rate for an ADU may already be at the moderate income, and we can count it there. It depends on what box we want to put it in, what we need to do. And I don't know if Barbara has any sense of any innovative programs around ADUs to make them low and very low eligible.
Let's see. I think our clients have been struggling with programs to make the ADUs affordable. Some of the more innovative programs that a number of cities have adopted are to have pre-approved construction plans that homeowners could use if they want as an option. A number of them waive fees for ADUs. A number of them, but the state has waived many of the impact fees for ADUs already. But I think they've found it difficult to incentivize individual homeowners to be willing to sign a deed restriction. One client had a fairly generous program that provided a very low interest loan in return for only 10 years of affordability, but still people, individual homeowners didn't want to restrict the rent of their units. I've seen cities be more successful by doing a survey of existing ADUs and showing that many of the rents are affordable. Many ADUs are rented to family members, a few to household help, maybe parents, the old granny flat idea. And those are often rented really for nothing or for very low rents. And those do count as affordable. So I've seen cities be able to justify anywhere from 25 to 40%, say, of ADUs just by doing a survey and finding out that the rents that are charged are, in fact, affordable.
All right, thank you.
And I just wanted to chime in here for a minute to note that HCD does publish a guidebook that tells jurisdictions what the guidelines are for counting ADUs towards their RENA, and that does offer us a couple of different methodologies that we could choose from. So both Barb and Alexis have touched on some of those options, but as long as they give us those different tracks for establishing affordability, we have those options available to us.
But without a deed restriction, we can't guarantee, like when an affordable house is built, we have a guarantee that that affordable house will be deed restricted for 40 years. If it sells, it's deed restricted for another 40 years to the new buyer. With an ADU, it isn't deed restricted in any way, and while they may say that they're going to rent it at this rate, when it's said and done, they may raise the rent 6 months after the people get in there, and then it's no longer an affordable unit.
And that's a fair point. Interestingly, at this point, the state doesn't require us to actually document it to the level that you're talking about, council member. It will allow us to do things like take a survey and find out what people are actually charging. That's one of the selection criteria. But at this point, it's not requiring deed restrictions such as you were suggesting that would really guarantee the affordability for a long period of time. It's true.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to turn the chair to Council Member Rary. Council Member, this meeting is yours.
Thank you. Enjoy your next meeting. So are there any more questions, clarifying questions of staff? At this point, Margaret, if you could take over, if there's any public comments to be made.
At this time, the public is permitted to address the City Council and Planning Commission on this item only. I received 0 public written comments on this item prior to the meeting. If you wish to speak under public comment, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature, and I'll call upon your name if provided and unmute you to speak. Remarks are limited to 3 minutes per person, and your microphone will be muted after the timer has expired. While we encourage your comments, state law prevents the City Council and Planning Commission from discussing items that are not on their meeting agenda, and if appropriate, they'll stop follow up on them. And I do see I have one hand raised, and I will start with Carolina Villaseca.
Good evening, City Council and Planning Commission. Again, I have a couple questions. I am not as familiar with all of this as all of you are. So my first question is, if housing is built as affordable housing, let's say moving forward, builders agree not to pay the fees anymore, which I think is a horrible idea. We really do need affordable housing in Brentwood. Does the deed restriction guarantee that the buyer isn't going to turn around and flip it? Does it also, I guess that's my question. Is the person buying the affordable house actually have the means to buy the affordable house where they can't buy a regular house, a regular priced home, let's say a market priced home? Number two, SB 9 is part of BOFA, and I'm wondering if the rest of BOFA will impact the build-outs that are left in Brentwood in terms of commercial build-outs, like PA1, and I think those are my questions for now. Thank you.
I see no additional hands raised at this time.
Thank you. If we can get staff to answer that, I do know that with affordable housing, deed restricted, I think it only goes up by CPI. Is that correct, Alexis? Or is it 3% or?
Well, so there's affordable rentals and affordable for sale units under our program. And I honestly don't know what the CPI is for the rent, I'm sorry. But I can find that out and report back. But yes, buyers do have to income qualify, and the deed restriction, you can't just flip it to a market rate unit. That's the nature of the deed restriction. It protects it at a certain affordability level upon resale for a period of time, depending on how it's identified in the agreement.
Yes, and we have a 40% deed restriction in, or 40 year restriction in Brentwood.
Yeah.
And if a person sells their house after 20 years and that next person purchases it, my understanding is it is another 40 years. So it's always 40 years unless somebody finishes off their 40 years, and then it's no longer deed restricted.
Yep.
All right. Oops.
And just to chime in on that.
I thought I unmuted myself, and I muted myself. So council members, commissioners, if you have additional questions or wish to express comments on this agenda item, please raise your hand virtually, and I'll call on you in order. No? Last chance, you guys. Okay. So if there are no other questions or comments from the committee and council, at this time we will move to the next item on the agenda.
Actually, did Catherine want to say something? Maybe?
Who?
Very kind, just me, through the chair. Thank you, Madam Council Member. I was just going to say our restrictions are actually 45 and 55 years, respectively, so they are a good long time. And just before you move on to the next agenda item, the state does require that we report each year on the status of our arena numbers. And so you get an annual progress report delivered to the council each March. That's a very detailed spreadsheet of where we are for the year. You've already seen this year's, and next year's will give you a glimpse of where we've come in the last year. So this item will be updated for you annually in the spring.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Great. All right. And with that, so the Alexis will present this next item.
Thank you. It's not so much a presentation, it's just a discussion of the future meetings and formats. Let me just call up that one slide real quick. So, oh dear, sorry about that. Okay. So this is, as I said at the very beginning, the first of what we did envision to be hopefully a helpful series to Council and Planning Commission and the public on focused topics. The idea was to add value by being able to take a deeper dive in these topics than we might otherwise be able to do in a normal public hearing about a specific item. So we'd envisioned future topics such as deeper dive into housing laws and regulations, which is what we had planned to come up next, including a legislative update and have experts present, experts like Barbara, instead of me, present that topic and really take a deep dive on things like ADUs and upcoming legislation like SB 9. There's another legislation, AB 215, that would have a lot of implications for the city if it were passed. And then possible future topics like, entitlement process and CEQA, a deeper dive into community enrichment and code enforcement and what they can and can't do, the environment and sustainability and how that intersects with community development and planning. So those were some of the topics we wanted to bring forward over time. And I know scheduling this meeting was very challenging. You're all very, very busy people, and we respect that. So we wanted to get your feedback on this format, whether a joint session is a good idea, or maybe in the future we do a town hall or some other idea and move that. So that's all this was, is just to get your feedback on whether this was valuable. First of all, should we continue to do it? And if so, what's best for you and your schedules and in conveying this information to you? So that's all. Not a presentation, but maybe a discussion.
Okay. Members of the City Council and Planning Commission, if you have clarifying questions of staff, please raise your hand virtually, and I will call on you in order. Commissioner Ziegler.
Thank you, Councilman Rary. The only thing I think this format's been fine. I don't know if it needs to go to a town hall. Obviously, right now with COVID and we're coming out of that, and future meetings, what those could look like could be beneficial to be in more of a town hall environment. I'll leave that for everyone else. But a couple of things that I wanted to just touch on I think might be helpful. I think for the most part, the council and the planning know, but certainly I know the general public, a lot of times when it comes to the Planning Commission specifically, we will get items that are coming to us, as an example, for design review. It's design review. The project's approved. The land use is already designated. It fits the mold and everything else like that. Yet we'll come to a design review and we'll have people asking tons of questions outside of that realm. And so I think there's some confusion when it gets to when it's an agenda item that's a design review only, what has happened up to that point. And so I think it'd be great to make sure and to help people understand what's transpired. A lot of projects that are being approved today were approved 5, 10, 7 years ago, and they just haven't been developed yet, and now they're coming finally in with that design review. So I think that would be helpful for people to understand that process. Maybe good for commissioners to understand that from kind of start to finish, but also I think help educating the public as to how and why when we get to that design review, why we are only really discussing certain topics and certain parts of that project versus going back and rehashing the full-blown land entitlements and so forth like that. So I think that would be good. Another one, and I think could be helpful. I know it's not one of the topics that you have on this, and so I don't know how it would fit into it. But when it comes to economic development, I think it would be very beneficial. Obviously, City Council sees a lot more of that, but selfishly from the Planning Commission, I think it would be helpful to get some updates periodically from staff as to what's going on. We're being asked to evaluate potential land uses or changes and things that can impact things, not only near term but long term, but getting a better understanding of what's being done in certain areas and understanding, they might not be breaking ground, but understanding where certain projects are and what the city's doing can help us make more informed decisions, I think, as a whole, because as we all know, what planning does goes to the council, and council approves. They all line up, and it's a domino effect. And so there's things that I think if we have a little bit more information on our side to help understand as we're looking at and reviewing potential projects, that could very much help us in the future. So those are just two things I wanted to comment on.
Okay. Thank you. And if we can do clarifying questions now, and then we'll get back to discussion or what we'd like to see after we go to public comment, because we have public comments at this point, right after this. So I believe it was Councilmember Mendoza was the next one, or was it Meyer? I didn't see whose hand popped up next.
It was me, but
okay.
Mine is actually more about the discussion that Alexis was talking about. So if it needs to wait till after public comments, or are we just discussing it?
This is clarifying questions right now.
Then I don't have any questions. I have more comments.
Okay. Commissioner Sparling, do you have any questions, clarifying questions?
I think mine will probably fit more in discussion than now.
Okay, great. And Alexis, if you can remove the future meetings format there, unless we need that up, so that otherwise I only see a couple people at a time. So with that, Margaret, if you can take over public comments.
Oops. At this time, the public is permitted to address the City Council and Planning Commission on this item. I received no written public comments. If you wish to speak under public comment, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature, and I'll call upon a name if provided and unmute you to speak. Remarks are limited to 3 minutes per person, and your microphone will be muted after timer has expired. While we encourage your comment, state law prevents the City Council and Planning Commission from discussing items that are not on their meeting agenda, and if appropriate, staff will follow up on them. And I am seeing no hands raised. Oh, we do have a hand raised. I'll call upon Carolina.
Good evening. I did ask a question that didn't get answered last time, which is about the rest of the BOFA bill. If what is passing through both the Assembly and the Senate and is going to be signed by the governor are going to affect the commercial build-outs in Brentwood, like PA1, based on the bills. I think it's SB 5 through SB, I think it's 11 or 12. So I'd like some clarification on that. And number two, I find this extremely informative as a resident of Brentwood. I would strongly recommend doing this again, even though I'm the only one here. I can send out the information that I learned on this meeting, which was a lot. I think it's very important to have it so that the residents can attend. So I would urge, whatever format you choose to have it, that you have an online element to this, because this time right now for a lot of families is like dinner and bedtime, and it would be really difficult to attend in person, but having it online is extremely useful. And that is my comment for future meetings. This was really helpful. And I think having both City Council and the Planning Commission together is also very helpful, because you both see the projects from a slightly different perspective, and it's very interesting to hear both sides and the sets of questions, and then either side can hear the other side. And so I think it's very fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no.
Thank you. If we can get staff to get back in touch with her regarding BOFA and what that pertains, and maybe even detailing it out with a follow-up to the rest of us, because it seems like it's a very detailed item.
Can do. Yes, thank you.
If you have any additional questions, council and commissioners, that you would like to express regarding this agenda item, please raise your hand virtually, and I will call on you in order. So, Councilmember Meyer.
Thank you. I'm assuming I can make a comment now.
Yes.
Thank you. This is actually kind of a continuation of what Chair Ziegler was saying, and I think that he raised a very good point about the general public's understanding of development A to Z, basically, what happens in that process from start to finish. And I like the idea of expanding on that and helping people to understand how that looks. But I also think we could include in that same conversation when our hands are tied. He mentioned the things that we were allowed to address and vote on and talk about, and that's really important. But there are also things that we specifically cannot talk about or impact or vote on, and I think that's a good part of that conversation too. And I think a lot of people would really appreciate understanding that a little bit more. We've got a lot of really engaged residents. I think that might help. And then as far as the format, I do like the interactive. I like what Carolina was saying as far as different perspectives of planning and council. So I think this does, as much as we're all kind of exhausted after our, Marathon Tuesday or whatever everybody else is doing, this is a helpful format to be able to kind of round robin and learn from each other and bring up things that one side thought of and the other one didn't. So when we go back into in-person in chambers, if we do a virtual and in-person combination, as was discussed, and then something, whatever it looks like, something that is interactive like this and that sparks conversation, I think would be really helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Sparling.
Yeah, I love the format. I loved it as a non-participant, I guess, as a citizen. I used to listen to the different town halls to learn more about the different subjects. So I think the format is fantastic. And I would hope that as we move back into chambers, that the virtual aspect for these types of meetings would continue. I think that allows for more people to be engaged and learn. I think in the long run, it makes it for a better city. I'd also like to echo Chair Ziegler's comment about economic development, specifically around non-innovation center, because there's obviously a lot of effort going into the innovation center, but learning more and having conversations about what we're doing for economic development outside of Innovation Center. If you listen to the SAV conversations that happened during the meetings, there were comments made by business owners that the city has not done as much as they would like to see. I'll just put it more nicely, to develop the city outside of the Innovation Center. I think that's a valid concern, right? Is what are we doing outside of Innovation Center to drive business? There's a 6% vacancy rate, which is extremely low, and as projects come to Planning Commission, that might change. I would like to know more about, so I have the facts of what's happening. So if I make the decision to change zoning, I know the impact, because as I said when I was interviewed for the position, I don't live in a vacuum. And in the Planning Commission, as I'm learning, I'm being forced into a vacuum, which I don't like. So I don't think that gives me a full picture. I'd also like to see some, if we have those types of conversations, benchmark what other cities are doing. I have view into what other cities are doing. I will say Vacaville with the California Biomanufacturing Center. I would say San Carlos with what they're doing on Industry Boulevard over the last couple of years, and obviously South San Francisco. If you know who I work for, and I'm in science, right? Those are all the hot science spots in the Bay Area. So it's not that Innovation Center of Brentwood can be that, but the public-private academic collaboration that's happening in Vacaville is fantastic. It's certainly something that we could look to replicate with another industry that could advance Brentwood further faster. if we have some collaborative conversations with other cities, what they are doing and how we plan moving forward, because we don't have a lot of space left. So how are we going to build an economy in Brentwood that is not reliant on new building? Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mendoza.
Piggybacking on what Commissioner Ziegler said and Councilwoman Meyer said, I think this is great. I think it's fantastic. I know I've talked to Tim Ogden about the website quite a bit. I think even before I was elected, I gave feedback on the website. But knowing where projects are, I know we have a little bit of a timeline, like when you click on a project, but I don't think it's as detailed as what residents need. So maybe a more detailed Gantt chart so that, like, Councilmember Meyer was saying, so that they know where we are, what we can do, what we can't do. If something's already done, we can't go back and change things that we already approved for a developer. So when we're looking at redoing the website, I think more detail is better and helps residents help educate themselves what is going on with development. Also, there was a while back, there was a Deer Ridge Town Hall over at the Senior Center. I thought that was great. Being live and in person, I think also, this is nice, we're on Zoom, but people do like going in person and being able to hear and ask questions and feed off of each other. I thought it was fantastic. So town halls are great. Maybe something, this is a little formal because, we have an agenda, we have public comments, but maybe something that's a little bit more free-flowing for people and taking them through a project from start to finish on what the steps were. So, Amber Lane is done, right? That one's done. Maybe taking them like, this is how it started. These are the dates that happened. These were the dependencies, and this is where we ended. That might be something good for them just to see an example, because they're always stepping in at different points, but they don't see it from start to finish. But I think this is great. Thank you, Alexis, and everyone who worked on this.
I'd like to follow up on that. When it comes to design review, there are some times that it's a by right. So it's already in the general plan to have this, it can be this type of business. So it's a by right. It's not a conditional use permit, it's a by right. And so when people come in, sometimes they don't understand that this has already been approved in a general plan to allow for this type of business to come in. So I think, yes, having part of that in there is good to know that it's been in the general plan for, 7 years now. So, and that was a huge public meeting. There are a whole bunch of public meetings to get to that point. So with that, if we are going to continue in this fashion, let's spread them out, not a couple in 1 month, and then, I think doing maybe one a month on this might be good. I don't know about everybody else's free time to be able to, work full time and also attend these meetings in addition to the Planning Commission meetings. So, if we're going to spread them out, that's one thing. If we're going to jam pack them, then, all in 1 month or try to get them over 2 months, that's a different story. That's just too many meetings to go through. And especially when we don't know what size each of our agendas are going to be, because what happens when we have a, 1,500-page agenda or, Bridlegate, what was that, 3,600 pages? Doing that and then having to follow up with another meeting the following week, it's not as easy. So if we can spread them out, then that would be a much better. Yes, Councilmember Mendoza.
The last thing I just thought about that I'm starting to get emails on is education on city limits versus sphere of influence and how annexations happen. Because I have a feeling that people are going to make assumptions about certain things that are coming up. And if we just clear the air on what it is and what it isn't and what our authorities are, how is this different from other annexation proposals that have happened and have gone to the ballot, I think that's going to be key, because I've already been asked, why did that one go to a ballot and this one might not? So that might be a good one to do soon before things heat up with some other projects.
Okay. Anybody else like to make a comment or have an opinion on how these meetings should be held? Nope. Well, with nothing else out there, can I get a motion to adjourn? And I need a motion from the commission and the council separately, correct? Yep. City Council, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I second.
All right. And roll call vote?
Councilmember Mendoza,
Yes.
Councilmember Meyer,
Yes.
Councilmember Rary.
Aye.
Motion carries with Vice Mayor Rodriguez and Mayor Bryant absent.
Okay, and Planning Commission, motion to adjourn.
Mr. Ziegler, aye.
Second.
Vice Chair
And-
Roll call?
Roll call vote.
Vice Chair Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Dolter,
Aye.
Commissioner Sparling,
Aye.
Chair Ziegler.
Aye.
Motion carries with Commissioner Roberts absent.
All right, everyone, thank you for your time this evening, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Goodbye.